one of my goals here is to reclaim Shakespeare. You know, I guess people know that a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets were addressed to what we call a fair youth, but it gets kind of shoved under the rug. So I think we should just say it more often. just, you know, claim it. Now, you know, people will say, so are you saying Shakespeare is gay? No, but I'm saying he wasn't straight. Okay, so that's quite enough, right? This is, gay history is, you know, LGBT history. It's even bigger than that. It's the history of non-heterosexuality. Right? So Shakespeare is, again, rather a mysterious character, and of course we don't actually know that this is a portrait of Shakespeare. This was the first portrait purchased by the National Portrait Gallery, so it has a really fundamental importance for the National Portrait Gallery, and it is clearly a portrait of an Elizabethan poet, Elizabethan Jacobean poet. He's wearing the things that poetic dudes wore. He's wearing this little bolo tie thing. That was what poets wore. And he's wearing an earring, which is what poets wore then and poets wear now. It's like the hip thing to do. Just ask my students. So yeah, so it's a poet. And this is why we think this is Shakespeare. I'm not kidding. It looks like the print of Shakespeare at the front of the first folio. And we know that Shakespeare's friends had seen that and thought it looked like Shakespeare, and this looks like that, so therefore this must be Shakespeare. Do we have any lawyers present here? I wouldn't want to introduce this as evidence in court. That's all I have to say about it being Shakespeare. But anyway, we'll just use it as a picture of Shakespeare for a moment. Shakespeare, again, is someone for whom sexual categories don't work very well. Again, he is somebody for whose other sex interests we do have some evidence. Shakespeare didn't have any legitimate children, but he was married as a minor, for which he had to get special permission, to a 26-year-old woman who was several months pregnant. I would say that's good evidence. Now, you know, it tells you that at some point he was interested in a woman. We also know if what one says in one's poems is evidence about oneself, and in this case it does seem to be, actually, that he was interested in a guy. And now, when people do Shakespeare in high school, they read a lot of the poems that are addressed to the fair youth. It's about some of them are not that clear, between 120, maybe 126 of the 154 sonnets. But what do they read? They read, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" You know, there's nothing very sexual about it, and nothing very sex-specific. But some of the poems are. And those ones you don't tend to read in high school, so that I will just read you the beginning of one of them, which sonnet 20, which goes, "A woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hast thou the master mistress of my passion." Period. Okay. Case over, right? I don't really need to go on. One of the traditions that we could talk about here is misogyny.
Can you read it again?
Yes, I could. "A woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hast thou the master mistress of my passion." So he's calling this guy the master mistress of his passion. Now, then he goes on to compare him to a woman favorably, of course. He says, "A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth, a man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth." So he's an object of universal attraction to both men and women. And it's not only that Shakespeare is writing about a same-sex attraction, but also ascribing same-sex attractions to, as it were, the entire male sex. So one of the things you have to ask is, and this is a really complicated question, how does this fit in a country where sodomy, which means specifically in a legal context anal sex, is a capital offense? And you shouldn't think it was just like a capital offense always. No, it had become a capital offense in the 1580s, not long before. how does Shakespeare write about same-sex attractions, owning them as his own? There's no answer to that question. It's an interesting question about Marlowe, about Shakespeare, about many Renaissance poets. Presumably, the best answer that any scholar has given is that there are two separate ideologies running simultaneously. There's a kind of church and law ideology, and at the same time, there's the aristocratic rake ideology, where, just as in classical Greece, women and boys are sex objects. And that's okay. And the poet, I think, may take on the role of the aristocratic rake to some extent. Don't get too serious about it, as Oscar Wilde found out. You should always remember that you're not one. But Shakespeare presumably did. Anyway, another possibility, but certainly in this poem, Shakespeare then ducks the issue by saying that he's not interested in having sex with him. Right? So we've already said that he is an object of attraction to both men and women. But then the poem goes on and says, "And for a woman wast thou first created, till nature, as she wrought thee, fell a-doting, and by addition me of thee defeated. By adding one thing, to my purpose nothing, and since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure." So he sort of ducks the issue by saying, yes, but I don't actually want his penis. Anyway, that is one way of dealing with this cultural contradiction, perhaps.